No Man's Land is an absurdist play by Harold Pinter written in 1974 and first produced and published in 1975. Its original production was at the Old Vic Theatre in London by the National Theatre on 23 April 1975, and it later transferred to Wyndhams Theatre, July 1975, January 1976, the Lyttelton Theatre April to May 1976, and New York October to December, returning to the Lyttelton, January to February 1977. Setting: a large room in a house in northwest London, on a summer night and the following morning. Characters: Hurst, a man in his 60s. Spooner, a man in his 60s. Foster, a man in his 30s. Briggs, a man in his 40s. Hurst is an alcoholic upper-class litterateur who lives in her house presumed to be in Hampstead, with Foster and Briggs, respectively, his purported amanuensis and manservant, who may be lovers. Spooner, a failed, down-at-heel poet whom Hurst has picked up in a Hampstead pub and invited home for a drink, becomes Hurst's house guest for the night, claiming to be a fellow poet through a contest of at least partly fantastic reminiscences. He appears to have known Hurst at university and to have shared mutual male and female acquaintances and relationships. The four characters are named after cricket players. Plot synopsis: a man in his 60s named Hurst begins a night of heavy drinking in his drawing room with an anonymous pair who he only just met at a pub. Hurst's overly talkative guest, calling himself a poet, long-windedly explains how he is a penetratingly perceptive man, until he finally introduces himself by the name Spooner. As the men are becoming more inebriated, Hurst suddenly rises and throws his glass, while Spooner suddenly taunts Hurst about his masculinity and wife. Hurst merely comments, "No man's land does not move, or change, or grow old, remains forever, icy, silent," before collapsing twice and finally crawling out of the room. A young man enters and suspiciously questions Spooner, who now becomes relatively silent about his identity. The younger man introduces himself as John Jack Foster before the entrance of a man in his 40s, Briggs, who also unsuccessfully questions Spooner and then bickers with Foster. At last, Hurst re-enters, having slept, and struggles to remember a recent dream. Foster and Briggs have also started drinking, and they refill the older men's glasses. Hurst mentions an album of photographs he keeps, commenting on the appearances of the people in the album. He does not appear to completely remember Spooner's identity, insisting that his true friends are kept safely in the album. Hurst begins drinking straight from the bottle, mutters incoherent statements, and continues to try to remember his dream involving someone drowning, when Spooner abruptly says that he was the one drowning in Hurst's dream. Hurst drunkenly collapses and Spooner now rushes into Hurst's aid, brushing away the two younger men and claiming to be Hurst's true friend. The younger pair becomes defensive and accusatory, asserting their obligation to protect Hurst against men of evil. Foster openly deplores Hurst's impulsiveness, his own past, and Hurst's alcoholism. It gradually becomes apparent that Foster is Hurst's apprentice and housekeeper, and Briggs is Hurst's personal servant. All exit except for Spooner and Foster, the latter of who says, "Listen, you know what it's like when you're in a room with the light on and then suddenly the light goes out. I'll show you. It's like this." He flicks off the lights, causing a blackout. The next morning, Spooner stands from his chair and attempts to leave, but the door is mysteriously locked. Briggs soon enters to deliver Spooner food and champagne, rambling on about how he met Foster and ignoring Spooner's desire to know why the door was locked. Spooner abruptly thinks of an excuse to leave. However, Briggs mentions that both Foster and Hurst are poets, the latter a successful and distinguished one, which Spooner seems vaguely to have known already. Hurst himself bursts in and is delighted to see Spooner, who he oddly mistakes for an old friend he has not seen in years. He speaks as though the two were Oxbridge classmates in the 1930s, which Spooner finally plays along with. Hurst and Spooner then bizarrely discuss scandalous romantic encounters they both had with the same women, leading to a series of increasingly questionable reminiscences, until finally Hurst is accused of having had an affair with Spooner's own wife. All the while, Hurst calls Briggs a variety of incorrect names and then launches into a rant about once-known faces in his photo album. Spooner says that Foster, who now reappears, should have pursued his dream of being a poet instead of working for Hurst. Spooner shows great interest in seeing Hurst's photo album, but both Briggs and Foster discourage this. All four are now drinking champagne, and Foster, for his own pride and dignity's sake, abruptly asserts that he desired to work in this house of his own volition, where he feels privileged to be needed as a secretary, housekeeper, and amanuensis by as famous a writer as Hurst. Suddenly, Spooner asks desperately that Hurst consider hiring him as well, verbosely praising his own work ethic and other virtues. After all this, Hurst merely replies, "Let's change the subject for the last time," and after a pause worriedly asks, "What have I said?" Foster explains definitively that Hurst's statement means that he will never be able to change the subject ever again. Hurst thinks back to his youth, when he mistakenly thought he saw a drowned body in a lake. Spooner now comments, "No. You are in no man's land, which never moves, which never changes, which never grows older, but which remains forever icy and silent." Hurst responds, "I'll drink to that," and the lights fade slowly to black. Production history. The London premiere of No Man's Land, directed by Peter Hall, opened at the Old Vic Theatre on the 24th of April 1975, starring John Gielgud as Spooner and Ralph Richardson as Hurst, and with Michael Feast as Foster and Terence Rigby as Briggs. It transferred to Wyndhams Theatre in London's West End on the 15th of July 1975. This production transferred to Broadway in New York City from October through December 1976, with Richardson nominated for the 1977 Tony Award for Best Performance by a Leading Actor in a Play for his performance as Hurst. Peter Hall's production returned to the National Theatre, playing at the Lyttelton Theatre from January through February 1977. The original production with Richardson and Gielgud was filmed for the National Theatre Archive and has been shown on British television as part of Pinter at the BBC on BBC4. A major revival at the Almeida Theatre, London, directed by David Levo, opened in February 1993, and starred Paul Eddington as Spooner and Harold Pinter as Hurst. Douglas Hodge played Foster and Gordon Granger played Briggs. In the Broadway revival by the Roundabout Theatre Company directed by David Jones, which opened on the 27th of February 1994 at the Criterion Center Stage Right Theatre in New York City, with Jason Robards as Hurst, Christopher Plummer as Spooner, Tom Wood as Foster, and John Sides as Briggs. In 2001, another major revival at the NT was directed by Harold Pinter, with Corin Redgrave as Hurst, John Wood as Spooner, Danny Dyer as Foster, and Andy de la Tour as Briggs. In the summer of 2008, a new production directed by Rupert Gould premiered at the Gate Theatre in Dublin, with Michael Gambon, David Bradley, David Walliams, and Nick Dunning. Gould's production transferred to the Duke of York's Theatre in the West End, London, opening on the 7th of October 2008 and closing on the 3rd of January 2009, the week after Pinter's death. A new production directed by Sean Mathias opened at Berkeley Theatre in August 2013, with Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Billy Crudup and Shula Hensley. It opened on Broadway at the Court Theatre in Repertory with Waiting for Godot on the 24th of November 2013. It closed on the 30th of March 2014, but was restaged in the UK in 2016, with Untitled and Damien Moloney replacing Hensley and Crudup. It played in Sheffield Lyceum, Newcastle Theatre Royal, Brighton Theatre Royal and Cardiff New Theatre before transferring to Wyndhams Theatre in the West End. Critical reception and interpretation. In reviewing the London premiere on the 24th of April 1975, Michael Billington, of The Guardian, observes that the play is about precisely what its title suggests: the sense of being caught in some mysterious limbo between life and death, between a world of brute reality and one of fluid uncertainty. The play is a masterly summation of all the themes that have long obsessed Pinter: the fallibility of memory, the coexistence in one man of brute strength and sensitivity, the ultimate unknowability of women, the notion that all human contact is a battle between who and whom. It is in no sense a dry, mannerist work but a living, theatrical experience full of rich comedy in which one speech constantly undercuts another. Over a decade after having written the life and work of Harold Pinter, the first edition of his authorized biography of Pinter, Billington discusses his critical perspective on the play in his videotaped discussion for Pinter at the BBC, broadcast on BBC4 television from the 26th of October through the 9th of November 2002. After admitting that No Man's Land is a haunting, weird play that he, himself, can never fully understand, who can? But it works on you. He reviews the genesis of the play's first line, which came to Pinter in taxicab while riding home from dinner out alone, and the thematic significance of the titular metaphorical phrase No Man's Land, and finds something of Pinter in both of the main characters, each one a writer whom Pinter may have to some degree feared becoming, one with all the trappings of success but is inured by fame, wealth, comfort, the other, the struggling, marginal, the pinstriped writer who does not make it. Though when Billington put his theory to Pinter, Pinter said, "Well, yes, maybe, but I've never had two manservants named Foster and Briggs." In reviewing Gould's revival of the play at the Duke of York's Theatre in 2008, Billington points out that Hearst, a literature haunted by dreams and memories, bullshit, as he tells Spooner, "In the last lap of a race I had long forgotten to run." But, while his servants conspire to lead Hearst to oblivion, Spooner attempts a chivalric rescue act, dragging him towards the light of the living. The assumption is that his bid fails, as all four characters are finally marooned in a no man's land, which remains forever icy and silent. In this play replete with echoes of T.S. Eliot, Spooner may appear to have failed in his apparent efforts to ingratiate himself with and perhaps even to rescue Hearst from drowning himself in drink, but Spooner still remains in the house at the end of the play in No Man's Land, along with Hearst, and the play ends in an impasse much like that of Pinter's 1960 play The Caretaker, to which critics compare No Man's Land, as various other critics do. Michael Coveney is still asking, yes, but what does it all mean? Kenneth Tynan railed against the gratuitous obscurity of Harold Pinter's poetic 1975 play when it was first produced by Peter Hall at the National, starring John Gielgud as the supplicant versifier Spooner and Ralph Richardson as his host Hearst, patron and supporter of the arts. but the play is always gloriously enjoyable as an off-kilter vaudeville of friendship and dependency. Quote, in The Guardian, Billington concludes that this is a compelling revival much aided by Neil Austen's lighting and Adam Cork's subliminal sound, observing, when audience and cast finally joined in applauding Pinter seated in a box, I felt it was in recognition of an eerily disturbing play that transports us into a world somewhere between reality and dream. Both Billington and Paul Taylor give the production 4 out of 5 stars, while Charles Spencer, reviewing the production in the Daily Telegraph, like other critics making inevitable comparisons with the original production, rates it as equally fine, with Michael Gambon and David Bradley rising magnificently to the benchmark set by their illustrious predecessors, but points out that he too does not feel that he fully understands it. Even after 3 decades, I cannot claim fully to understand this haunting drama that proves by turns funny, scary, and resonantly poetic, but I have no doubt that it is one of the handful of indisputable modern classics that Pinter has written, and a piece that will haunt and tantalize the memory of all who see it. In another feature on Gould's 2008 revival, following the responses of 3 Pinter virgins who did not understand or enjoy it, The Independent's critic, Paul Taylor, reiterates his praise of No Man's Land, concluding, like many classic Pinter plays, No Man's Land is about the reaction to an intruder who threatens the status quo ante. The subtlety that gradually emerges in this play, though, is that Spooner, the seedy Prufrockian failed poet, is the alter ego of his host, the moneyed litterateur Hearst, and that his predatory intrusion also represents an abortive attempt to reconnect Hearst to life and to his creativity, and to save him from the bitter stalemate of old age. Mysterious, bleakly beautiful, and very funny, No Man's Land demonstrates that though it may take a little while to latch onto the laws of Pinterland, it is well worth the effort.